So recently on the channel, we of course took a look at something that every Nintendo 64 owner needs, that being an EverDrive 64 and a preloaded micro SD card. Now I'll have links to these products in the description box down below that are Amazon affiliate links, but basically you should check out that video to see what your Nintendo 64 is really capable of. The company that actually makes those micro SD cards, Eternal Retro, reached out to me and thanked me because business was booming all of a sudden for them, and they're a small business that's just trying to make a mark in the retro gaming scene. So thank you guys for supporting smaller businesses as well. They do have a website, which I will link in the description box down below if you want to see other products, but if you do pick up an EverDrive or you do pick up one of those preloaded micro SD cards, I do recommend using the Amazon affiliate links in the description box because, well, it puts a little bit of money in your boy's pocket as well. But one of the things that I sort of teased in the video was the fact that the Nintendo 64 can actually run quite a few emulators, and the experience is actually pretty good for a lot of different systems. So in today's video, I want to show you guys different emulators running on the Nintendo 64. Now, in order to get these emulators sort of going, you do need something like an EverDrive cartridge, and a preloaded micro SD card does make it a bit easier. Now, when you buy an EverDrive, if you don't buy a preloaded micro SD card, the most recent update will actually include the FPGA core for the NES on it, along with a Game Boy emulator as well, which will give you some games to, basically you have the emulator already set up and stuff like that. Now, for the other stuff, I do recommend the micro SD card pre-built because it comes with everything on there, and I'll show you guys that. But there is one emulator that isn't on the micro SD card that I'll also show you how to set up. So without any further ado, let's hop straight into this and take a look at emulators running on your Nintendo 64. All right, so like I said, if you buy one of those preloaded micro SD cards that's in the description box down below, pretty much all this stuff will already be on your EverDrive unit, but the SNES won't be. I'll show you how to set that up because it's a newer emulator. Now, when it comes to what is being done here, SNES, Game Gear, and both Game Boys are using emulators, whereas the NES is actually using an FPGA core, meaning that you get the highest accuracy possible, but you don't get the additional benefits of emulators such as save states and stuff like that. Now, I did have some people asking about the resolution and why isn't it 4:3 for my previous N64 video. That's just because of the monitor I'm using. I can do a native size of the image, but it's just kind of small. So since I have an HDMI modded system, it tends to stretch it out a little bit if I can't manually put that I want the monitor or TV to go 4:3. So don't worry, it will be 4:3 pending that your monitor or your screen or whatever that you're using does allow you to change it manually. This is just a really cheap, crappy monitor. But we're not here to talk about monitors and stuff like that. We're here to talk about performance of these different, in this case, this is an FPGA core, but as far as these different emulators are concerned. So we're going to start out with a big one here. That, of course, being Castlevania 3. This is a game that does have challenges on, certain clone consoles as far as compatibility is concerned. But as you can see here, since we are running an FPGA system, it looks and runs exactly how it should. The visual quality, I think, is actually, pretty good, all things considered. I mean, it looks better than using an RF video or a AV composite, NES system would. So, I think it looks rather well done. The colors look nice, the resolution and all that sort of stuff looks acceptable to me. And it's just a fun way to play NES games. Now, the controls are pretty much exactly how you would think they would be. You have your A button, and then you have your B button. A will jump, B will use the whip in this situation. And I will say the Nintendo 64 D-pad is extremely underrated. And I know I just fell there. But I think this D-pad on this system or on this controller is great, dude. Like, I really enjoy playing these games and using the N64 controller, as strange as that probably sounds to people, but I think it does a good job. I really like the D-pad, and maybe I'm just like super used to the N64 controller, but as you can see here, everything is running great. So let's check out something else from the NES. What about weird NES ROM hacks? You can play those too. Here's Sonic in Mario World. You know, you got to go fast, I guess, and it's interesting. I don't really understand the appeal of this. Like, it's just a skin, and I get it, and like maybe like in early 2000, like this was cool, but I don't know. But yes, you could do various ROM hacks and stuff on the NES FPGA core. So I mean that is pretty cool, because you know, you could just put kind of whatever you want on there. But as you can see, like, NES stuff works great on here. There's no issues. There's no problems, even if you try sort of more challenging games. And I think the controller is actually pretty well suited for, you know, some of these classic games. But let's go ahead and move over to the Game Boy. And yes, I did kind of drag that out because I wanted to see what this area looked like. But yeah, okay, whatever. All right, so we'll start things off with our traditional Game Boy system and take a look at some games here. One thing I do like about the Game Boy is that this is using an emulator, and you'll see here in just a second why that's actually really cool in terms of what you can do with things like that. So you can see here, you know, it's Metroid. It's running on a Game Boy emulator. It looks and sounds exactly how it should. Such great music in this game. Like this song that we're listening to right now is a super underrated song. It's an absolute banger. But you can see here, like, you're getting, you know, quality performance out of it. It actually looks pretty good, better than it would on your gross green Game Boy screen that you had back in 1989. But here's where things get really fun, because while the control scheme is the same, A to jump, B to shoot, you know, like you would with a standard Game Boy, by hitting the left C button, we actually get some additional options here. And this is where things get really cool. So we can change the input of the controller if we, for whatever reason, want to do something a little bit different. But this is where I think things get really neat, because you can adjust different things, such as the scaling of the screen. You could do soft pixels or sharp pixels. I don't really know why you would do or like the smoothing filter. I don't know. Maybe some people like that. I like to see as much detail as possible. But here's where things get really cool, because you have different layers of color that you can adjust. So, you know, you could change, you know, individual things on here, which is actually like freaking awesome, dude. Like, I think this is such a cool feature for this. So you could kind of make it like how you would envision the game to be, kind of similar to something like a Super Game Boy or whatever. But like, you know, now this looks like a completely different game, and I think this looks awesome. So, you know, it's not like the biggest deal in the world, obviously. Like, you can do this on other things, but to be able to do this on a Nintendo 64 emulator is really cool. So you can also fast forward by hitting the right C button. You can make your save state by hitting the down C button, and you can load your save state by hitting the up C button. So, you know, it functions just like an emulator would, but there's just something, I don't know, something extremely satisfying about playing your Game Boy games on a Nintendo 64 and being able to, you know, honestly make it look really pretty. So that's what the Game Boy emulator does. You know, very impressive stuff. I haven't had any sort of compatibility issues with anything I've played. I mean, granted, I haven't played like the entire library, but I've played a good handful of games on here, and everything ran and looked exactly how it should. And in some cases, might have even looked a little bit better because I adjusted the colors to make it look cooler. And of course, you could play different hacks of games for the Game Boy on here as well. I know what you're saying. Well, this doesn't look like a hack at all. This looks like Castlevania 2, but this is actually a Castlevania 2 speed hack that makes us move faster, and I really think it adds quite a bit to the game, because the original game, you know, was a bit on the slow side. So your various hacks and ROM hacks and homebrew products, these are all going to work on this emulator as well, which definitely opens up the library of things. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at Game Boy Color because, I mean, it's pretty much the same emulator as the Game Boy, so we get the same sort of different options here as far as scaling and, of course, different sharpness levels if you want to do that. This is actually a homebrew product that is Super Mario Land 2, the 6 Golden Coins DX. So basically giving it a negative color palette as how it will look if this was actually released by Nintendo. So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone here. But as you can see, once again, we're getting great performance out of this. You know, everything looks and sounds as it should. And this is just an awesome project in and of itself because I think Super Mario Land 2, the 6 Golden Coins is like one of the best Mario games ever. And the fact that like Nintendo does absolutely nothing with it, like it was so creative, so many cool levels, so many awesome songs, like it was almost like a fever dream for Mario games as far as like creativity was concerned. So this is a super awesome project. I absolutely love it, and I think it looks great running on our N64 right now, which is a crazy thing to say. But let's check out the Game Gear next. So the Game Gear, unfortunately, has quite a few weird problems to it, and it's a lot on the sound side of things. Now, you know, some of these emulators are indeed super old, so they're not getting updated or anything like that as far as like recent updates are concerned, except for the Super Nintendo, which we'll look at in just a second. But you can hear like the audio is not good in this. Like, just listen. Like it's having a seizure. Now, the games themselves range from, you know, playable to actually somewhat enjoyable. Like this, you know, Sonic Chaos here seems to be running, or Triple Trouble, I should say, is running well. It's just the audio is atrocious on here. So it's not something I would recommend as far as, you know, playing these games for long spurts, because the audio might grate your ears, and, you know, some games work better than others. But I do feel like, you know, obviously I'm not a technical guy, but I do feel like this is something that could be potentially fixed by the community. It's just, does anyone care about an N64 Game Gear emulator and the compatibility of it? You know, probably not in 2024 and beyond. But hey, maybe we can bother MVG and tell him to fix this emulator, or at least take a look as to why the audio is just so bad. And the final emulator we're going to look at is the Super Nintendo. Now, whereas all of these other emulators are established and aren't being updated anymore, the Super Nintendo emulator is actually being worked on constantly. So this is a newer emulator, and the progress that they've been making on this is extremely, extremely impressive. The emulator itself is called Sodium 64, and I'll have a link to their GitHub in the description box down below where you can download this. Now, as far as usage is concerned, you just move the Sodium 64 file onto your SD card and, you know, make it have a folder in it and whatnot, so that way you have a place to put your ROMs, and that's all you really have to do. Now, as far as the ROM situation is concerned, the first and easiest way is to basically just look at the file extension for your ROM. If it is in an SFC file format, you need to change that to SMC. Now, I've actually had decent luck just renaming the ROM from SFC to SMC and getting that to work. One of the games that I'm going to show you guys is actually something that I did that way, and it worked fine. If you download the ROM and it is in SMC format, you don't have to worry about that. There is another way. You can run a Python script to convert the ROM to SMC format. I'm not a Python guy. I don't really know how any of that works, but theoretically, just changing the ROM name should make it so that it will be recognized and applicable for Sodium 64 to basically, you know, play the game on the emulator itself. Now, this emulator does have problems with things like Mode 7. Like I said, this is something that is being actively worked on, but the progress that they've made simply within the past 6 months is actually like jaw-dropping. Like, yes, Mode 7 games, there are tons of graphical issues. Super FX chip games, they're not going to work. But the stuff that does work actually works really well. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple different games here. So the first one we're going to look at, all tried and true Super Mario World. And you can press start in order to see your frame rate. So you see we're getting a, smooth 60 frames with no lag or anything like that. Now, obviously, once you start to play the game, you'll want to look out for that frame rate. But, as someone who has played the game, there is no sort of issue with it. Now, you might be wondering why those things just popped up on the screen. You can do some weird thing by hitting the Z button that'll make like a layer pop out in front. I don't know if that's to get through like graphical issues that exist with this emulator as it stands now, but, whatever. So as you can see here, we are getting 60 frames per second for the game itself, and it's looking and running great. Now, the interesting thing is the control scheme. You actually have to use the C buttons as the 4 face buttons for the system, and A is your pause button, which I don't really care for, but I mean, once you get used to it, like it's honestly not bad. But like I said, this is a super work in progress as it stands right now. And the fact that this looks and runs as good as it does, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous, all things considered. Like, imagine if Nintendo had been like, hey, you can play your Super Nintendo games on your N64 too. Like, I think that would have been freaking sweet. Like, backwards compatibility was not, the same sort of issue as it stands now, whereas, people want it. Backwards compatibility really didn't start, until, well, I guess, the Atari, you could do stuff like that. But as far as more modern consoles were concerned, PlayStation with the disc-based stuff. But yeah, this is, this is running excellent. And the fact that this is such a newer project, like, I think really speaks for the future of this. And, we might end up getting, like, complete compatibility with Super Nintendo on N64, which would be absolutely amazing. Street Fighter may have never come to the Nintendo 64, but that doesn't mean we can't play Street Fighter. As you see here, Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the Super Nintendo is another game that works on here. Now, a lot of games do not work, so I'm not trying to give you guys the impression that everything is going to work on this. Like Mortal Kombat, they run at like 50 frames, and they're weird and glitchy and stuff like that. But this, I don't know. There's something very strange but very satisfying about playing this game on a Nintendo 64 that I just absolutely, I don't know. I just think it's so cool. Like, and it runs great. I've had no issues. I've actually beaten this game a couple different times playing through it. But being able to play Street Fighter 2 Turbo on my Nintendo 64, it feels so taboo. But somehow, some way, it feels so right. And once again, the D-pad on this controller is fantastic. We should have gotten many more 2D fighting games like this on the system. But, obviously, 2D wasn't considered cool at the time. It was, passé, even though those are the games that, tend to look the best in terms of, holding up graphically. Get out of here, Guile. But yeah, so you can play this, and there's one more game I want to show you. Oh yes, I had to bust it out. Turtles in Time for the Nintendo 64. Like, think about that. Just think about what I am saying right there. But yes, Turtles in Time is actually a game that runs surprisingly well. Now, you are going to run into some graphical issues with some Mode 7 stuff, but the throw right there, that's actually not Mode 7. That is just a scaling tactic that gives the illusion of Mode 7, but it's actually not. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, RGT, that's a pretty smart thing to say. How do you know that? I asked MVG, honestly, when I was playing this and it was working well. I was like, hey, what's up with that? But yeah, like, compatibility is constantly growing on this. So this is going to be something that is constantly updated, this emulator. And I really feel like eventually you're going to be able to play a vast majority of the library, if not potentially all of it, which I think is super cool, man. There's something very weird but very satisfying about playing Super Nintendo games on your N64. So yeah, this is just a quick look at some of the things that you can do. There are some, like, personal computers from back in the day, like the ZX Spectrum and the MSX, that you can also set up on your Nintendo 64. I'm not really interested in those systems. I just think it's cool that, like, technically speaking, you can get backwards compatibility on your N64 with NES and Super NES stuff now. And it looks and plays surprisingly well. So let me know in the comments section down below what you guys think about this stuff. Like I said, I'll have links to everything in the description box down below, so you can pick up the EverDrive and the preloaded micro SD card. I'll also have a link to the Sodium 64 emulator in the description box down below. Like I said, it's extremely easy to set up, so don't be worried about that. And give me your thoughts and feedback in the comments section down below. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.